Well, gentlemen, we are back at it again. Mavericks and Pioneers. Super excited to have you guys. Of course, first, we just need to start off with our anti-host. Because
anti-host is here.
He is in the house.
The dead horse will continue beating. We're not going to let the joke die.
Me against you two.
That's right. We bring it. We welcome it.
That's it. But my name's Stephen Gillum, CJ McPhail with us. We got a fun topic today. So I guess that would have been last week.
Yeah.
At Founders and Creators, which of course is the course that we're doing at Studio, 8-week course to help entrepreneurs take meaningful action towards their dreams, right?
Yes.
We kind of took on a pretty difficult and controversial topic. It's one that we all interact with on a daily basis, but we talked about money. And CJ, I like the way that you framed it, because when you and I first met and we said, okay, we want to have a week on money. We think it's critical to the conversation. You said something like, well, we all have a relationship with money. So can you explore that a little bit and kind of get us set up?
Yeah, well, we all have a relationship with money. I think I'd frame it a little differently. We all have a story with money as well. And that story is often based on our experience, especially as kids. If we grow up with difficulty, especially if maybe our family grew up in poverty, it tends to create, not always, but it tends to create a story and a narrative that if you're not careful, if you're not aware of it, and you'll get clarity on it, will start to drive your life in ways that you never would have imagined.
Sure.
And that can be very good, and it can be very, very not good. Mm-hmm. So I'm not here to judge when I say that. I'm just here to describe it.
Yes.
But the fact is, I'll use myself as an example. You know, having grown up with not a lot of resources with my family at the time when I was a kid, I'm shocked to this day at how many narratives I allow to spin off out of control in my mind, and how that drove my relationship with my wife, and just the stupidest things. And really what it did is it took away precious time that I can't get back. Wow. And I guess I only offer that. I feel like I'm recovering. I don't know if you ever arrive, but I'm recovering. I'm in a much better place, that's for sure, and a very grateful place, actually. But I'm also able to look back with clarity and go, I don't want that. So we brought this up in Founders and Creators because we really want to make sure and not assume that no one else is struggling with that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I know people were, because they came up to both of us, right? And we had some pretty cool conversations with some emotion actually that night. I would say so far, as we've only done 4, but that was of the 4, from my perspective anyway, it elicited the most emotion.
Wow.
And literally in a few cases, tears.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that didn't dawn on me till you just said that, but I think that's true. That's crazy. And it's interesting how money so occupies our thoughts.
Yeah.
And the way that we interact with our families, the way that we interact with our businesses, for sure. Yeah. One of the students, it's probably not a word, but one of the participants of the course came up to me and he said, "Man, I was a part of another group once, and we asked the question, what are your earliest childhood memories with money?
Yeah.
What sticks out to you?" And simple question.
Mm-hmm.
But as I thought about that, I started to wonder, I would imagine that those earliest memories have a pretty profound impact on the way that we view the topic. Yeah. If you grew up in a family, of course, like you mentioned, in my family, for example, I think there was a lot of stress around money, and we were middle class, certainly weren't wealthy, but we definitely weren't poor either. Yeah. But when there's a lot of stress around the conversation and money management, you kind of get the sense that there's never enough, or there's just barely enough. Yeah. And that changes the way that you interact with the world. It changes the way that you do business. And so obviously, Eric, you're here with us. That's a super exciting part of these first 8 weeks. I'm really curious your thoughts as it relates to money and entrepreneurship and your relationship.
Yeah, it definitely consumes a lot of our thoughts, whether we admit it or not. I think it's one of those things. I think our early year definitely forms or had deep impact on our perspective and relationship with money. And then there's a relative piece to it. Like when you're around people that have more money, then it elicits all these different emotions and ambition, desires, and insecurities. And then when you're the one that had the most money in the room, that's a whole different experience. So some of it's like the environment and like who you're in proximity with.
Yes.
And for me, I grew up in the church. My parents were pastors, and this would I would say they were poor.
Sure.
I didn't know how poor they were because my parents, and I didn't know this till I got into my adult years or later teen years. My parents made it clear, we worked really hard to make sure you never knew how much lack was going on. So I go replay all these stories, like, I want those pair of shoes and all this stuff. Look, I want, that bike. Go, my parents found a way to actually get that done.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my respect for my parents is wild. The other part of the story for me is like, I feel like my parent did one leg of the journey of changing the narrative around our family on money. And then I feel like Candace and I are taking it farther.
It's great.
What I mean by that, my parents, what they definitely taught me was generosity is the biggest value.
Yes.
And, I think this is public information. It's about to be public information.
All right, here we go.
But my parents would give money away instead of buying new shoes or taking care of like basic necessities.
Wow.
Not like, an extra pair of shoes, like basic necessities. They just felt, my dad had always felt like this will break this thing off of our family if I'm just generous. And to this day, he's the most financially generous person I know. When you look at how much he gives relative to how much he makes, it's ridiculous still to this day. So he would say, that's the stake I put in the ground.
Yes.
The stake that I would say we're putting in the ground is that, but it's also investment, savings, and there's actually something to do something with instead of just kind of getting to break even.
Yes.
So that's the space we're in. So my relationship with money was, it's a weird one, meaning had to change a lot of mindsets, a lot of paradigms around it, and had to really define. And that really came through an experience with coffee, interestingly enough, around abundance versus provision. And there was an 18-month period where I couldn't buy coffee. I tried so hard to buy coffee. And it broke something off of me. And that's a whole long story. So
I know that story, by the way.
you probably
That's a
heard
cool
it,
one,
yeah. So that was in my maybe late 20s.
Oh, wow.
I would say up until that point, my relationship with money was more break even, just get enough.
Yep.
And it wasn't unhealthy. It was just, it's all I knew.
Yeah.
Until I went through this whole experience with free coffee for 18 months. And then I began to realize, I'm being invited into a different relationship with money. So
That's cool.
So, and even in this stage of my life right now, my relationship with money is changing dramatically. So anyway, it's kind of a broad answer, but it's a conversation. It's an important conversation.
Yeah, I love that. So what I'm interested in, if we have time, would be to explore both of those pieces. Because if I had to summarize that, it's kind of the generosity piece and then what you might call the stewardship piece. Okay, now we've been entrusted with some resources. How do we build that, multiply it ultimately, not just to bless our family, but to touch the world around us, So the generosity piece, if I could just kind of get vulnerable with you guys for a minute, over the last, my goodness, I would say probably 15 years, was always deeply inspired by generous people. In fact, when I would hear like what we would maybe call a God story, a story about a person of faith doing something, that I thought was super heroic or courageous, generosity was at the top of the list of the things that inspired me the most. And so I would hear stories. I remember hearing a guy named Todd White one time telling a story of going to a guitar center. And there was a young kid there that had a lot of brokenness in his life and was looking at this guitar that was several $1,000s. And Todd just pulls it down and just buys it for him.
Cool.
And that to me was like, it changed my life. Just here, I don't think I'll ever forget that story because something inside me said, I'm going to be that guy one day. CJ, you recently got to meet a mentor of mine and Bob Heiner, if you're listening, shout out to my brother.
Come on.
And Bob tells a story. He had a former employer who at one point brought a briefcase to work at it was like a company Christmas party. It was filled with $1 million. And this guy just begins giving out stacks of cash.
Amazing.
Incredible. I mean, it's just so unbelievably generous, And I think if I have the story correct, hopefully I do, but he said something like, I don't want to hear anybody complaining about what he or she received versus what you got. This is what we're going to do. This is what we felt led to give you guys. And we hope it blesses you. And of course, some people are getting $50, $75, $1,000, just as a bonus. So I hear those stories. But my problem is I had this fear of there not being enough. And you maybe commonly heard it referred to as a scarcity mentality, or a poverty mentality, whatever. But I had this mindset. And so for me, I had this desire to be super, super generous, but then I was super tight-fisted. And I wanted to give, but I was paralyzed by the thought, well, if I give this money, how is that going to hurt my family? How are we going to suffer? And so basically, I guess it would have been now 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember. CJ's got me on this thing, or at the end of every year, we ask God, what is our word? What's the theme
Hmm.
of the
Yes.
coming year?
Yes.
And that year, the theme was generosity,
Yeah.
something I was deeply passionate about, but not particularly strong in.
Hmm.
Now we had always given tithes and offering my whole life since I was 16. I've never not tithed, and usually more than 10%. But as far as doing things above and beyond that, like a truly generous, wildly generous person, it's just something I struggled with. And so that year, God had us on a journey, man.
Hmm.
And it started small. I mean, it would be give $100 to a family in need, whatever. And over that year, what the Lord did was so unbelievably incredible. But the reason why I bring it up is the way that my mindset was changed was through generosity.
Hmm.
And it didn't happen until I started giving. And so I literally gave my way out of fear. And I don't believe I'll ever go back. I mean, it really, truly transformed Aaron and I. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious your guys' experiences with generosity, the impact it's had on your life, and how that affects the conversation about money.
Hmm.
Well, a thought that hits me is, our journey was when we started our business 5 years ago, this current business anyway, Outsider Coffee. What we were inspired by at that point, especially, and I still am, I'm really more Maverick. And I love, Eric, to go back to our first podcast, you talked about Pioneer, and that
Hmm.
really resonates with you.
Hmm.
And it challenged me. I'm like, which one really resonates with me?
I did the
Like,
same.
did you? I was like,
Yeah.
I would honestly, I don't
Where
know.
did you land?
Maverick.
Maverick?
Yeah,
How
me
Yeah,
about
too.
you?
it really,
Maverick? Okay.
it
That would actually
really,
make sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
it really hit me. But I was like, good job. I know it's challenging me. So I'm gonna go I'm like 70% Maverick in
Mhm.
this conversation. And I love Pioneers. I mean, I adore Pioneers.
You better.
But I'm not saying that for your sake.
Well, we're gonna talk,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But I'm thinking 5 years ago, and one of the things that inspired us most was watching people take what little they had,
Hmm.
Come on.
trusting God to take it,
So
and
good.
just do stupid things with it. I mean, insanely great things with it. And that really inspired us. And we feel like we gave the Lord, and it's a part of why. I shared this at one of our sessions, and I don't recommend this. Okay, I really don't. I'm not joking. We cashed in our retirement accounts. We just did, and that is foolish
That's Maverick.
squared.
Maverick.
It is foolish squared. It is, but also it's just where we were.
Yeah.
I honestly, a lot of years later, I do not look back and go, I should not have done that. I'm honestly awkwardly proud
I love
of
it.
doing that. But I don't recommend. I don't have a friend. I think I'd recommend that that's what they should do. I just wouldn't say that.
This is not legal counsel.
Please don't
not
do this. Please don't do what I did. But we did, because we just felt like we were in this position. And a lot of it was this sermon that we had heard in 2005 from Bill that really
Bill
changed.
who?
That really changed
Sorry.
our stars. It is
don't think
maybe
I know
Bill
this guy.
Johnson last name.
Doesn't ring a bell.
And it just really, really moved us. And, we'll talk about that later. But just people that in our lives that were taking a little bit and saying, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And we're tired of the world defining this as if we're in poverty. Like, we're going to take this and we're going to use it and we're going to see what happens. And that's what we did.
It's amazing.
And we now have a bunch of employees, and we're going to have a bunch of locations by the end of the year. And it's all what God has done. But we took what little we felt we had to offer and watched him
Hmm.
roll with it.
Hmm.
And what it's done, especially for me in the last 5 years, I think Lindsay would say the same thing, but it's just smashed this poverty mentality that I grew up with. This I'd say scarcity is a more accurate
Yeah,
word for me.
sure. Yeah.
And just believing that if I have a little, it's going to go away, so I better
Mhm.
hold on to it.
Mhm.
And which I hate. I hate that I was that way so strongly, but that's where I am still now. I love
Yeah.
watching people, and I love challenging people to take what little they may feel they have, and then roll with it. And
Mhm.
you talked about earlier, we were talking about missions and different things, and I've been fortunate to do some of that myself. And Lindsay lived in Chile. I lived in deep down in Baja California,
That's cool.
and watching those cultures, the Chilean culture and the Mexican culture, especially in these contexts, take so little and just be so joyful,
Yep.
and then move mountains with it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It really transformed me. I just never imagined it would challenge me in my business. So that's where I am with it. And
That's cool.
I think I love the context of generosity for sure. But if
Mhm.
I'm being honest, what I love is watching somebody say, I don't have a lot, but this is what it is, and I'm gonna roll the dice. Now I have a Maverick, and I
Yeah.
know not everyone leans that
Mhm.
way, but that's what we've done, and it's worked for us.
Yeah, well, and you know what I hear you saying, CJ, too? It's like, I mean, generosity is relative, right? So it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter whether you have $100 in the bank or $100,000 in the bank or $1 million in the bank. I mean, that's kind of the story of like the widow's mite,
Right.
And so like from my perspective, it's like if you are giving sacrificially,
Yeah.
that's generosity. That's beautiful. You mentioned the scarcity mindset earlier, and I was thinking about how it affects business. One thing that we're super passionate about is in the loving yourself conversation, just understanding like, hey, they can never be me. But
That's
one of the things I realized is you get really aggressive in competition in business if you have a scarcity mentality.
that's right.
Because that if your competitor gets that order from that customer, that
That's
means
right.
you're not.
That's
And that
right.
means you're missing out and now you're angry.
That's right.
And you might even get vindictive or bitter. And so one of the things that I love about this conversation is how it's affected the way that I do business. As I've told you guys, we have a wholesale industrial bearing business.
Mhm.
There are a lot of companies in the US and around the world that need bearings.
Yes.
And I can promise you that Stephen Gillum and our company, we will never get a fraction of that business, in the sense of like, even if we were to get 1% of it, it would utterly overwhelm us. And so I went from going, okay, freaking out about who's getting this, to going, there is more than enough.
Yeah.
And, we're fortunate to live in a country that has a tremendous amount of opportunity. And so for current or aspiring entrepreneurs, I just want to remind our listeners like, hey, listen, there is space for you.
Yeah.
And you don't have to allow the success of your competition to intimidate and or discourage you. You can go, hey, they can never be me. I'm going to carve out my niche, and there is more than enough to go around, and that will transform the way that you do business.
Yeah, I think money is, I mean, when you think about it, outside of relationships, money has the ability to reveal your character more than anything else.
Hands down.
So, I mean, like if you're in a deep relationship with a spouse or friend or whoever that person is in your life, that reveals who you really are.
Yes.
The more you do life together. Apart from that, might even reveal more on some level.
Totally.
And so, to me, it's our relationship with money, our ability to handle money, is so deeply entwined with obviously mindset and paradigm, but it's also character.
Yeah.
So, I know at this table, money is not the problem.
Yeah.
Right. No.
It's the love of money. It's that
Yes,
whole
thank you
thing.
for
So
saying that.
money is not the actual issue.
Mhm.
It's the heart behind it that seeks it, or what that whole relationship there. And so that's where the character conversations comes in. That's where. So I think some things that are good to keep in mind is like, okay, what are those decisions that I'm going to make no matter what, or how much is in my bank?
Yep.
It's almost like the default responses. So I know for me, it's like tithes and offering is it's a non-negotiable.
For sure.
Like it's just, we're always going to do that. Then every time I go to a restaurant, I will always tip a certain percentage. And if I can't tip that, I won't eat there. So it's just, there are other things in my life, like we will do this regardless
Yeah.
of the month
Yeah.
or regardless of the year, whatever kind of year it is. And but the character piece is there.
Yeah.
And I think I would encourage people like, pay attention to what's going on inside when money is in your orbit.
Yes.
It's an amazing opportunity to actually adjust things that need to be adjusted
Mhm.
and address things that are really root causes. And some of them go way back to childhood. Some of them go back to horrible experiences, or they just live in a world where dog eat dog world,
Yes.
and they've been shaped and formed by that reality. And so what an amazing opportunity. I mean, all of us have money transactions every day of our life. It is one of the greatest revealers of the human heart.
So what I started praying during the season of God teaching us about generosity, and again, it's not that we didn't give because we always had, but I just wanted to be on a whole nother level.
Mhm.
And not that I wanted people to hear the stories about me, but I wanted to participate in them.
Mhm.
To be able to say, man, we did some things that were wild. Because generosity, by the way, can get super fun.
Mhm.
Tithes and offering, that's great. That's a consistent way to be faithful and obedient. I love all that. But like, I'm like, what happens like when you're buying someone a car?
Mhm.
Or you're paying for a vacation? Or you write a big check to said ministry, whatever it is, like that kind of stuff, it gets a lot more exciting, especially you surprise people. I mean, it can become like a holy addiction is how I think of it. I mean, I really got like lit up. And but what I started praying during that season is, Father, I'm asking for the character
Mhm.
to sustain resource well. And I don't want you to bless me beyond my capacity to manage it well.
Mhm.
And so if my heart begins to get weird, and by that I mean if I begin to fall into greed for sure, or um, kind of you could say arrogance, self-absorption, any of those things, I don't want it. But I don't think it's like we kind of make it like mutually exclusive. Like you either have money and therefore you will be greedy and self-absorbed and arrogant, or you don't have a lot of money.
Hmm.
And I'm going, no, maybe there's a better way.
There's a lot of other
There's
options.
a lot of other
Hmm.
options. Like, cannot the people of God, could He not give us the grace and the character it takes to sustain that, to walk in humility, in generosity, and love and kindness to people, that it's actually a blessing, not to us, not
Hmm.
to just us, but to others around us, as opposed to a curse.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how I feel about the character thing. It's like, if that's not in place, uh, we've said this multiple times, even in Founders and Creators, CJ, it's like, I think blessing and prosperity is a far greater test than adversity and scarcity. I really do. I think it will reveal a
I would
lot more.
agree.
And so, but it's an opportunity too. And I think that's super fun. What are your thoughts, man?
Dude, it is an opportunity. I love you said that. I mean, we talked about this on that night, but the statement is money really isn't the problem.
Yes.
Now, we can make it the problem through the narrative, especially what you're talked about through our childhood experiences and various things, but it is really not the problem. And as believers, if we're a believer, we serve Jehovah Jireh, and it's one of his names. He is
Come on,
the provider,
go there.
right? So one of the things we talked about, and in this part's, unfortunately, it's controversial. And Eric, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. But there's all these names of the Lord, and they're so powerful and they're so amazing, and they cover all this expanse of who He is and His nature and His heart and His love. Elohim and right, El Shaddai,
Hmm.
and all of this. It's just incredible, and none of us would call ourselves that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm the savior of my family.
You're not the Messiah.
I'm the Messiah of my family. I mean, that would be like, good night. That's scandalous. That's like heresy. That's whatever. It's a bunch of things. But it's not healthy.
Yeah.
Ain't no good in that.
Yeah, you're not the healer.
I'm not El Shaddai,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't
Sure.
say any of these things. And yet somehow church culture has allowed one of these things to slip in, and that is for us to call ourselves provider.
Hmm.
And I know there's a couple of verses that I believe are very grossly taken out of context quite often, and that's my opinion, especially in 1 Timothy 6. But I reject it personally, wholeheartedly. I am not the provider of my family. I work hard for my family. I'm a leader in my family, that's for sure.
Yep.
I accept those things, but I am not the provider.
Mm.
I am not the provider.
Come on,
I do
dude.
serve Him, though,
Yes.
and He loves me dearly, and boy, does He
Wow.
provide for me.
Hmm.
Come on.
I get to watch Him do things. I've watched Him do things this week that's insane. The way He shapes people's hearts. And what we talked about, Eric, I want to hear your thoughts. Well, I believe He provides money, and I know we're talking about money, but He also provides relationships. And those are the two things I believe Jehovah Jireh, in that context for me and in my life and my experiences, He provides us money, but He also provides us relationships. And it's so funny how those relationships can often lead to money.
Hmm.
Not that I want it to, or I thought it would, or even that it could.
Sure.
I mean, we were just talking about another person, that an amazing woman that's a part of this group earlier, who came up to me and said she cannot wait to connect me to some pretty senior people in another state
Yes.
that she has relationship with. I had nothing to do with that,
Hmm.
but I give Jehovah Jireh all the credit for that.
Hmm.
Yes.
All of the credit for that. That's not my doing. I had nothing to do with it. I can't even believe I'm saying it. And I look forward to whoever these people are.
Hmm.
And that may mean nothing. It may be amazing,
Hmm.
but that's not the point. We're on this journey. So, Eric, what are your thoughts on provision, being the provider, church culture speaking to this?
Yeah, I don't know your definition of provider, so I actually feel like it's my responsibility to provide. So I don't know what your definition
Sure.
is of that, but the paradigm around it for me is we are nothing with Christ, and yet we're everything with Him.
Yeah.
So it's this, it's really an insufficient way to describe it, but it's like this ecosystem. Without Him, we're nothing, but with Him, we're everything.
Yeah.
So it's this weird paradox. And so I
Yeah.
do think there is a measure of, but again, our definition of providing could be different,
Yeah.
or maybe they're the same for all I know. But I do think there is the way I look at it is like, I think some people actually have the ability to create crazy wealth.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so what comes with that is this deep desire, and they almost feel bad for it. They're like, no one else has this insane desire
Right.
to create wealth.
Mhm.
So when I'm around, whenever I'm around those people, I'm like, go for it. You have permission
Yes.
to just do it.
Yes.
Doesn't matter, and I'll champion them. And so I did it just recently with someone else. They're like, I just fucking approach to create wealth. Go do it then. Go crush it.
Yes.
So I think that the challenge is we are given this like this thing is on us. This code is written into us to create wealth or to actually provide or whatever. So I think it's more semantics probably between what you're saying. I think what I hear you saying is like, I can do nothing with him.
Right.
Without him, I mean,
Right. Yeah.
the only way I can do what I'm doing is because of him.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's interesting because some people are really designed to create crazy wealth, and some are just really good at the relational side of things, creating incredible relational wealth. So I think there are different dimensions that we all kind of have niches and sweet spots and lanes that we just do really well in. Those are just some of my thoughts. So,
Okay. I like it. Yeah, and I think my heart is this burden that I see in men, especially because that's who it tends to be placed on. And it's not to be, sexist or comment or anything else. It's just, I think it's the tradition. And I see this great burden on great men who feel like they're failing because they're not taking 4 vacations this year. They're not providing. They haven't worked hard enough. They're not, they're not providing enough. There's this burden, and I really believe they have an opportunity, and this is my experience and my opinion, but they have an opportunity to relinquish that and give it to him and then watch what he does.
Yeah.
So not to suggest not to work hard. I get so many people when I say this, they want to come up to me and with these stupid comments, to be frank. I mean, just like, oh, so I'm just supposed to go sit on the couch and watch Netflix. No, come on. No, of course that's not what we're saying.
Yes.
Work hard and have joy in that work. I mean, knock yourself out. But at the end of the day, he takes his name seriously, and one of his names is provider. I mean, he got real serious about that one. So I'm not going to call myself that. Yet that doesn't mean I don't provide. It doesn't mean he doesn't provide through me.
Yeah.
So it is nuanced, but there's an emotional burden that I think the church, I'm going to say hopefully very unintentionally over time, has placed on many men. Or maybe that's how they've chosen to take it. Whatever is right. I don't know there. I didn't grow up in the church, so I bow to your both experience.
Sure.
But
it's almost
I just
like,
find it
sorry,
unfair.
CJ, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. I thought you were done there. It's almost like capital P provider versus lowercase p provider.
that's
you know what I
probably
mean?
good. Yeah.
And it's like sometimes what I hear you saying, and don't let me put words in your mouth, is those two things get conflated and confused. And in an attempt to make it happen as a family, we almost try to take on something that we were never meant to, a burden that we were never meant to. Again, we're not suggesting that you in any way minimize your work ethic.
Right.
Well, that's what I was going to point out because I've heard people. I'm not the provider, and they begin to get lazy and do nothing.
Yeah.
So that's the nuance.
We're
Right.
against
I'm like,
that.
I think it. In some ways, it's worth debating whether it almost takes more faith to start a business or to take risk than it is to just let God provide everything for you.
Yes.
So there is a tension and a paradox
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And so, I mean, being around so many, not to pick specifically on young people, but this seems to be a common rhetoric in young people. I'm just trusting that God will, and there's the beauty of it. But then I think when years go by, it's like, you're not really working hard.
Yes.
You're not actually contributing to something. You're just expecting a high return for no input.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that's where I'm like, no, you are the provider.
Yeah, sure.
You need to go get a job. Go work at Chick-fil-A. Just do something. But
Yes.
just waiting and waiting. Like Kenneth and I joke, like we're like, if everything just went to whatever and went to nothing, like, well, I would be knocking on whatever door just to get a job.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think that's the paradox there.
I agree with
So yeah,
Well, the
I agree.
provision has to be in the context of your work, right? I think I one morning at the studio was doing the offering, and I said something like, "Can you imagine me saying I wanted to get in the best shape of my life, but never going to the gym and never changing my diet?" And it's absurd, but sometimes we do that with money, with wealth, and we say, "God bless me, bless me, bless me," but you're taking no practical steps to build wealth and to transform your family, really, your lineage, And so, for sure, we would definitely say that provision is in the context of you doing your part. And we don't want to abdicate people from their responsibility, not for laziness. That to me is not faith. Faith is participation. It's me doing my part and letting God come, but ultimately still saying, you are ultimately the provider, but I'm going to do my part. And those things, when they marry, something beautiful can happen.
and the relational part of it is huge. Like I was telling Stephen last night, just in the last week and a half, something shifted dramatically in a certain relationship that we're actually going to start moving and taking some great risks financially and investments.
Woo-woo.
But it was all through. It was all like didn't know this person. 8 days ago.
Sheesh.
And now it's like, oh, this is what we've been waiting for, an opportunity that
Yeah.
kind of had this kind of vibe to it.
Yes.
It's like, oh, it's here.
Yeah,
And
there it is.
because it was another relationship. So I think some of it is you're just going through life.
Yes.
Right.
And opportunities pop up, relationships pop up, and doors open wide. And I think we talked about it here. Like Steve Jobs had that commencement speech. Did we talk about it in this podcast?
I don't remember.
No,
Okay,
not
so
this
Steve
one.
Jobs had this amazing commencement speech, and he was towards obviously he was older by the time he said this, but he was saying life makes a lot of sense when you look backwards. And you reckon, oh, this dot connected to that dot, connected to this dot. So I think that relational part of this in the
Yes.
context of money and investments and business and entrepreneurs is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, moving here, I knew not a soul. And it was like, okay, start meeting people.
Yeah.
Oh, this person introduced, that's how we got the build. All of our buildings came because someone introduced me to somebody.
Yeah.
So that is the part of the provision part of it, the
Yes.
resource part of it.
That's so
That
good.
is, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, and the relational side is far more exciting to me, honestly, personally. But I would point out, and I think you're saying this. I just want to make it crystal clear. You guys moved across the country, started something new, some of which you'd never done before, not at least in this context,
But we've never started
or,
something. No,
or
yeah.
in the South. You're right, and then you had this meeting
Thank
with
you
this
for saying
person,
that.
right? With this, you're talking about a week ago, whoever this person is, which sounds exciting. I mean, so it happened in that context. Lindsay and I moved across the country, and we knew no one. I mean, I'm not joking.
Yes.
Well, we knew our real estate agents, who are amazing people, and still great friends with them. But that was all we knew, as a husband and wife. And the people that we now know, and the relational, capacity that we have in the Greenville area of South Carolina, upstate South Carolina, is thrilling. It's shocking.
You're honestly welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, then I have to say, I do know Steven too. Yeah,
Are you getting
exactly.
finder's fees or royalties?
Well, it goes without saying.
10%.
Free coffee. You're going to get free coffee.
He's getting free
You
coffee.
just have
He
to
already
drive
gets that.
40
already
minutes.
get
You have to
free
drive
coffee.
40 minutes to get it.
No,
Yeah,
he gets
exactly.
the coffee. Yeah, that's true.
Or more, maybe an hour.
I'm gonna be so annoyed because I know I'm gonna taste some of those drinks, and I'm gonna like it so much, and I'm gonna have to drive stupid 40 minutes. to
Ooh,
go
I
get
look forward
coffee.
to
Yeah,
it.
but
I'll
you
be
know,
there to make it for you.
Hilarious.
Yeah. So there's a lot to celebrate when we step out and those
Yes.
people pop up in our lives, and it is through us providing. I think small p, if you want to look at it that way, and it is through us risking, and it is through us making these steps.
Yep.
And that's why I always want to encourage people that are listening to this podcast. If you're dreaming of starting a business, it's time to go.
Let's go.
And it's time to not say I don't have the money.
hmm
You may not. That may be a true statement, but you do have something that can do something. And then if you follow that, it's amazing what happens. And as simple as this is, in 2024, we're still having this conversation.
Yes.
And that's okay, because human nature is human nature.
Yep.
But it's time to say enough. If you're really ready to go, let's just use that word. It's one of my favorite words, enough. Enough. Gonna go. Gonna make that call. Gonna do that thing. Gonna take that step. And whatever that is for you. But let's not let our narrative of money hold us back anymore. And let's recreate a new narrative that says, I live in abundance and I
Yep.
have a lot.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that compared to my neighbor or my friend. I'm just saying, I know I have what I need. I'm going to roll.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what God does.
It really is. And, just a final thought, I know we're closing up here, is I remember saying that night for founders and creators, I just said, most of the time what we want is we want the provision and the answers to all of our questions for step 50
Yeah.
when we're not even at step 3 yet.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's not how it works, you guys. Like, if you're trying to start a business, like, don't worry about the problems and the financial resources you need for step 50. Forget that. Let that go. Let's start with step 1. Do you have the money to start an LLC?
Yeah.
I think it's a few $100s. Is that right? Am I remembering
I just
correctly?
did one this week, 154.
150. Okay, so
$154.
so let's say I'm making up stuff right now. Let's say you want to have a taco truck, and that said truck is 50 grand. I'm just making this up.
Sure.
well-
That's about right.
That's not step 1, dude. Step 1 is $154 for LLC, for example. Step 2 might be, what does it cost to do a website? $12 a year, and you bought a URL.
Yeah.
And if you had to, you could design it yourself. There's a lot of free templates out there. So my point is, what often, at least in my experience in business, is you begin taking these steps incrementally, and as you do that, the next answer comes. It may be impossible right now.
Yeah.
But let's worry about that when we get there.
Yeah.
I bet you step 1, 2, 3, 4 aren't impossible.
Yeah.
So that is what I hear you
What's
saying.
amazing too is like you shared this last night. It's like your threshold expands.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
it's so like 50 is overwhelming. Step 50 is really overwhelming. But
Yes.
when you're step 49, you're like, Oh, this
Not a
makes
big
a lot
deal.
more sense now. So I think some of it we actually don't have. We're not expanded enough
Come on.
to even handle these dreams that we have. So
That's
some
so
of it's
good.
the journey of closing the gap
Yeah.
between. So like decisions I'm making now, like I was scared to make them 3 years ago,
Yes.
10 years ago, terrified.
Yes.
Now I'm like, oh, these are. Let's just go. Let's just keep going at this thing.
Right.
So I think some of it is an expansion of your ability as a human, as a leader, as a business owner, entrepreneur, to expand your ability to take risk.
Yes.
So I think some of it's the journey. So I think, and that's what you were sharing last night. It's
Right.
like step 1 to 49 is you need to grow
Yep.
and you need to start. And when you get here, step 50 is going to make a lot of sense.
That's right. So good. Thank you for saying that. That's a great way to close this out.
Gotcha.
Love it.
My guy, he's got my back.
Got you.
The anti-host is
The
always
anti-host is in the house.
Well, guys, we thank you so much for listening with us today. As always, feel free to hit that bell icon, like, subscribe, all the things. We're so excited to be a part of this journey, man. It's super fun. We want to encourage you, equip you in any way we can, and looking forward to future weeks to come. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thanks for listening to Mavericks and Pioneers podcast, where we empower current and aspiring entrepreneurs to take meaningful action towards their dreams. We'll see you next time.